Chapter 13. Turning Point.
The morning air shimmered with residual power as Kaelan approached the greenhouse where my grafted specimens waited in their dimensional soil. Yesterday's horror clung to the mountain's atmosphere, the weight of witnessing cosmic economics that reduced consciousness to currency in exchanges spanning multiple realities. He moved with careful deliberation through terraced pathways that adjusted automatically to accommodate divine presence, his amber eyes studying the hybrid saplings I'd coaxed into existence through techniques that bridged gaps between worlds. The air around him still crackled with ambrosia-enhanced energy that made reality bend in subtle acknowledgement of recently renewed power.
"Show me what you've created,"
he said, and for the first time since my captivity began, his voice carried genuine curiosity rather than divine command. My hands trembled as I guided his attention toward specimens that shouldn't exist, according to any law of natural selection. The starfruit apple hybrid pulsed with contained starlight, its leaves already showing dimensional shimmer that marked successful cultivation beyond terrestrial limitations. When his scarred palm pressed against hybrid bark, divine energy flowed like liquid fire made visible. The flowering stage that followed revealed miracles I'd never imagined possible. Accelerated growth compressed centuries of development into moments of breathtaking transformation that defied every principle my mother's teaching had instilled about patient cultivation across seasonal cycles. One tree bloomed with crystalline petals that chimed in harmonious chorus when touched by mountain winds carrying scents of distant worlds. Another bore flowers that pulsed with their own heartbeat, organic rhythm of life operating according to principles beyond earthly biology. But the third specimen stopped us both with wonder beyond scientific achievement. Silver blossoms opened like captured moonlight to reveal centers that glowed with soft amber radiance, their perfume carrying scents of renewal and healing that made my enhanced bones ache with recognition of power that could reshape existence. The fragrance spoke of miracles beyond mere medicine, transformation that could cure diseases plaguing mortals since consciousness first awakened to its own mortality.
Kaelan's eyes widened as divine insight revealed the tree's true nature through senses that processed information beyond mortal perception.
"This is more than medicine,"
He whispered, wonder bleeding through voice usually controlled by centuries of cosmic service.
"This could cure diseases that have plagued sentient beings since the beginning of recorded time."
The implications crystallized in my mind, like frost forming on winter glass. Not just healing for settlement children, but salvation for countless beings across dimensions, where suffering had become accepted component of existence under cosmic hierarchy that viewed pain as natural consequence of mortality. The village. I breathed, thinking of all the families who might benefit from such miraculous healing beyond the handful we'd already saved through desperate theft. Would you? The words tangled in my throat like thorns, hope and desperation warring with knowledge that I was asking divine authority to surrender something priceless. But when our eyes met across the impossible flowering tree, something shifted in his expression. Not the calculating assessment of divine lord evaluating livestock maintained in useful condition, but something approaching understanding. Recognition that some miracles demanded sharing regardless of personal cost.
"Yes,"
He said simply, and the word carried weight that reshaped the air between us like stone dropped into still water. The flight to Millbrook Settlement passed in thunderous silence of divine power, carrying precious cargo through mountain passes, where reality obeyed different physical laws. I pressed close to his armored chest as we soared above clouds that parted before his passage like curtains acknowledging theatrical performance. The healing tree cradled carefully in massive arms that could reshape continents through casual application of immortal strength. Wind that tasted of ozone and approaching storms whipped through my hair as we descended toward familiar territory that seemed impossibly small from divine perspective. The settlement appeared below us like scattered handful of stones, homes and gardens that represented 20 years of patient rebuilding from conquest that had reshaped human civilization. But those tiny structures contained lives that mattered beyond their statistical value, in equations balanced by powers whose attention could erase entire species through bureaucratic oversight. Children who played because golden apples had challenged established order. Families reunited through theft that had triggered consequences spanning multiple dimensions. When we landed in the settlement's central square, Earth trembled beneath impact of divine presence that made surviving animals scurry for shelter. Terrified faces peered from doorways like prey animals, watching hawks descend from skies that offered no protection against beings whose power operated beyond mortal resistance. The healing tree took root with supernatural eagerness of botanical intelligence, recognizing optimal growing conditions. Its silver roots spread through soil that had known only struggle and scarcity since divine conquest reshaped human existence, seeking nutrients that would sustain miraculous healing across spans measured in community generations rather than individual lifetimes. I knelt beside the sapling that represented collaboration between species, pressing palms against earth that already hummed with healing radiating from roots that drew sustenance from dimensional energy as much as terrestrial minerals. The satisfaction of work completed despite impossible obstacles felt like benediction after weeks of cosmic horror and political manipulation. But when Elder Morrison emerged with council members whose weathered faces reflected decades spent navigating divine authority through careful submission, my satisfaction curdled into bitter frustration.
Praise be to Kaelan the Worldbreaker.
Morrison declared with religious fervor that transformed political necessity into theological celebration, falling to arthritic knees before towering God, whose presence made reality itself seem more substantial.
Our prayers have been answered by divine mercy beyond our deserving.
The other villagers followed his example with synchronized precision of survival strategies, honed across 20 years of occupation. Their gratitude flowed toward the being who delivered miraculous healing, while completely ignoring the mortal hands that had grafted impossible specimens through techniques bridging gaps between worlds.
Recognition that should have acknowledged collaborative achievement instead became worship directed at divine authority, whose power sustained itself through systematic processing of consciousness into renewable resources. The familiar pattern of erasure pressed against my enhanced awareness like physical weight, credit flowing toward established hierarchy while actual work disappeared into historical footnotes.
Your people show proper reverence,
Kaelan observed, and I caught something in his tone amusement at theatrical performance rather than genuine appreciation for religious devotion. When I shot him sharp look that carried 20 years of accumulated frustration at systematic dismissal of competence in favor of political convenience, one corner of his mouth twitched in expression that almost qualified as smile. Recognition of patterns that went beyond species barriers and authority structures.
though I suspect they're missing part of the story.
He continued. Acknowledgement that felt like victory after lifetimes spent watching less competent people receive praise for work they hadn't contributed to beyond political positioning and careful genuflection to established power. Imagine that. I replied with dryness that carried enough edge to cut crystal, a god taking credit for someone else's achievements. His actual laugh caught me completely off guard, deep and genuine sound that transformed scarred features into something approaching humanity, despite divine enhancement that sustained existence through participation in cosmic economies too terrible for complete moral accounting.
Careful, little botanist,
He said, warning that carried no real threat, despite words that technically constituted advice about survival in proximity to beings whose casual gestures could flatten settlements.
That tongue of yours could get you into serious trouble with the wrong audience.
But the exchange felt like genuine conversation, rather than interrogation, weighted with implied consequences for insufficient deference to cosmic authority. For the first time since my arrival at the sanctuary, words carried meanings beyond political calculation and species hierarchy. The moment shattered when his expression grew serious with attention of divine senses, detecting disturbances beyond mortal perception. Something in the mountain's breathing had shifted, rhythm altering in ways of cosmic attention, focusing on activities that violated established protocols.
We must return immediately.
He said, voice carrying undertones of urgency that made my stomach clench with sudden dread about consequences following collaborative achievements that challenged authority structures older than human civilization.
The Seraph messengers grow impatient with delays.
He continued, lifting me into arms that radiated divine power enhanced through consumption of processed consciousness.
And delays carry prices that neither of us can afford to pay.
As we ascended toward mountain peaks that pierced alien skies, I caught one final glimpse of the healing tree's silver blossoms swaying in settlement breeze that carried promises of miraculous recovery for generations, yet unborn. Whatever fragile trust had developed through shared botanical passion, whatever hints of connection had sparked between mortal and divine despite cosmic hierarchies designed to prevent such complications, would be tested by forces that viewed emotional attachment as dangerous weakness requiring correction. The flight back to Sanctuary passed in silence that felt different from our first journey together. His arms held me securely, one beneath my knees and the other supporting my back in what mortals called a princess carry. The armor couldn't quite hide the solid warmth of his chest against my side, muscles that moved with easy strength as his wings beat through mountain air. He smelled of ozone and something darker, like forge fires and distant storms. Not unpleasant, but wholly alien. The scent of power that operated beyond natural law. I found myself hyper-aware of how small I felt against his frame, how his divine enhancement made even simple gestures carry weight that could reshape reality. Growing understanding settled between us that some miracles extracted prices compounding across dimensions where individual identity served as currency in exchanges that sustained divine existence through methods too terrible for complete comprehension. But for precious moments in Settlement Square, recognition had passed between collaborators who'd achieved impossibilities through combined expertise. Whether that recognition could survive whatever judgment awaited remained question that only cosmic authority would answer. The mountain's heart drew closer with each wing beat, promising revelations about consequences that followed when desperate love challenged established order through methods that bridged gaps between worlds with surgical precision and miraculous results.
Chapter 14. Consequences and Choices.
Sleep eluded me like water slipping through cupped hands, each attempt at rest shattered by memories that burned behind closed eyelids. The silk sheets felt foreign against skin that still hummed with residual energy from our flight. The way his armor had pressed against my ribs during our descent to the settlement, how divine power had radiated from his frame like heat from a forge barely contained. My fingers traced patterns on the coverlet that adjusted automatically to my body temperature, remembering the casual strength with which he'd lifted me, the way reality itself seemed more substantial in his presence. When the six-limbed predator had cornered me among alien botanicals, death had approached wearing chitinous armor that reflected rainbow patterns. But salvation had materialized in the form of controlled destruction, the Worldbreaker reducing existential threat to scattered atoms with terrifying ease. The healing tree's silver blossoms haunted my dreams when exhaustion finally claimed consciousness. Fragments of memory blurred with imagination. Kaelan's scarred hands gentle on hybrid bark as divine energy flowed like liquid starlight. His laugh transforming features carved by centuries of cosmic service into something approaching humanity. The way he'd agreed to help my settlement without hesitation or demand for payment beyond collaborative satisfaction. But darker images intruded through the spaces between heartbeats. Thousands of amber vials stacked like inventory in cosmic warehouses. The casual consumption of refined human essence that sustained divine existence through systematic processing of consciousness into renewable components. The terrible beauty of power built on harvested awareness, immortal biology maintained through participation in economies that treated individual identity as bureaucratic inconvenience. I woke before dawn with his name on my lips and confusion tangled in my chest like thorns that drew blood from organs I hadn't known possessed such capacity for complex pain. The chamber's bioluminescent veins pulsed in rhythm with something vast and patient waiting in the mountain's crystalline heart. The morning servants bustled with unusual energy that crackled through the bathing chamber like electricity before storms, their nervous chatter filling spaces normally governed by professional silence. They moved with coordinated precision of long practice serving divine households, but today carried undercurrents of excitement I hadn't witnessed since my arrival.
"The master requests your presence at breakfast,"
the youngest announced, her dark eyes bright with curiosity that transformed usually careful features into expressions of genuine interest.
"in the great hall, like before."
But their ministrations carried extra attention to detail for special occasions requiring enhanced presentation. They dressed me with silk the color of morning mist, its surfaces catching light like captured starfire that moved with otherworldly wind. Hair was braided with threads that pulsed like captured lightning, creating patterns that hurt to observe directly yet drew the eye. Their whispered conversation spoke of improved moods and rare expressions of satisfaction, divine temperament that had shifted from volcanic fury to merely dangerous, like weather systems that promised storms but delivered unexpected sunshine instead. Something had changed in the mountain's emotional landscape, alterations that registered in enhanced senses trained to detect atmospheric shifts that preceded either salvation or catastrophe. When they departed, I stood before mirrors that reflected more than simple physical appearance. The woman looking back had been transformed through divine intervention that exceeded mere cosmetic enhancement. Features refined beyond human limitation, while somehow remaining recognizably mine, skin that caught and held light like polished marble touched by starfire. The corridors stretched through spaces larger than their physical dimensions as I made my way toward the great hall. Living stone pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that carried meanings beyond conscious comprehension. Through crystalline windows, alien constellations wheeled in configurations that belonged to skies unknown to earthly astronomy, their light filtering through impossible geometries to create shadows that pointed in directions that violated three-dimensional physics. But it was movement in peripheral vision that made my enhanced survival instincts prickle. Grimjaw materialized from shadows with timing calculated for maximum psychological impact, her 8-foot frame unfolding from darkness like nightmare-given flesh. Morning light filtering through dimensional barriers cast her scarred features in sharp relief, creating topographical maps of violence across her face and arms. When amber eyes fixed on me with calculating intelligence, the air itself seemed to recoil.
"You think yesterday's performance impressed anyone?"
Her voice carried undertones of avalanche barely contained by pack discipline, each word weighted with authority earned through lifetimes spent guarding against threats to carefully maintained order. She stepped closer, using her imposing height to loom over my enhanced form like mountain-casting shadow across valleys that had never known sunlight. The scent of wild places and controlled violence filled my nostrils, creating sensory overload of predators whose hunting grounds spanned multiple dimensions.
"Playing gardener while real power flows through divine veins,"
she continued, massive hands flexing with casual threat. Steel could be crushed like paper through simple application of pack-enhanced strength.
"My alpha shows mercy to insects, but insects should remember their place beneath his heel."
The confrontation crackled with barely restrained violence that made crystalline fixtures throughout the corridor ring. Other pack members materialized from concealment with movements of coordinated pack tactics, their silent presence adding weight to their leader's words without requiring vocal contribution.
"You are temporary."
Grimjaw stated with certainty that chilled my blood despite the corridor's carefully maintained warmth.
"A breeding experiment that will pass from memory once cosmic politics tire of this particular game. But we are eternal. His family, his strength, his true companions across lifetimes that span the rise and fall of civilizations."
Her amber gaze burned with possessive fury of centuries spent guarding pack unity against threats both internal and external, territorial instincts that had been refined through service to divine authority that demanded absolute loyalty, regardless of personal cost or moral consideration.
Do not mistake kindness for acceptance, little mouse.
She snarled, voice carrying promises of educational experiences that would involve significantly less restraint than previous encounters.
When the Seraph grow bored with their current entertainment, you will disappear like morning mist that never possessed substance.
The pack faded back into shadows with coordination of supernatural stealth capabilities, leaving me alone in corridors that suddenly felt vast and threatening despite their familiar bioluminescent guidance systems. But Grimjaw's words echoed off walls carved from living stone, their implications settling into consciousness like poison. The great hall stretched before me like cathedral carved from architectural impossibility, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadows that moved with their own purpose when observed through peripheral vision. The table that stretched across central space reflected depths of infinite distance contained within finite dimensions, its surface bearing foods that carried sense of worlds whose names existed only in divine memory. Kaelan sat at the table's head with scarred features relaxed in expression I'd never witnessed during previous encounters. The ambrosia consumption had restored energy that radiated from his massive frame like heat from stellar cores. Divine power operating at capacity that could reshape local reality through casual attention. Steam rose from dishes that defied identification, crystalline fruits that chimed when touched by mountain winds, bread baked from grains that grew under alien stars, substances that promised nourishment beyond earthly comprehension while simultaneously challenging digestive systems designed for terrestrial biology.
You look troubled.
He observed as I took designated seat at the table's far end, distance that felt both protective and isolating. The space between us carried weight of cosmic hierarchies that prohibited casual interaction between divine authority and mortal subjects, regardless of collaborative achievements. Your pack leader has strong opinions about temporary arrangements, I replied, forcing lightness into words weighted with Grimjaw's threats that had carried promises of educational experiences involving significantly less restraint. Something dangerous flickered across his expression. Not anger exactly, but calculation. When divine attention focused on violations of established protocols, the results typically involved permanent solutions to temporary problems.
She values loyalty above all other considerations,
He said with careful precision of diplomatic necessity rather than personal endorsement of pack leadership methods.
Sometimes that loyalty complicates relationships with other variables in cosmic equations that require delicate balance to maintain stability.
We ate in companionable silence, broken by occasional observations about botanical specimens visible through tall windows that filtered light from alien constellations, their presence serving as backdrop for conversation beyond political calculation through shared fascination with impossibilities. The food itself defied every principle of nutrition I'd learned through 20 years of survival in post-conquest settlements, flavors that registered in spectrums beyond normal taste perception, textures that challenged expectations about solid matter's relationship to digestive processes, substances that provided nourishment while simultaneously delivering information through channels beyond conscious awareness. Gradually, conversation warmed as we discussed the healing tree's applications across dimensional barriers that separated worlds where suffering had become accepted component of existence under cosmic hierarchy. His knowledge of divine cultivation techniques revealed depths of scientific curiosity I hadn't expected from the Worldbreaker, whose reputation had been built through systematic application of controlled violence.
You have gifts that could reshape how divine authority approaches botanical research,
He said, amber eyes holding genuine respect beyond species barriers and authority structures imposed by cosmic bureaucracy.
The greenhouses contain specimens that have resisted cultivation for centuries.
He continued, offering recognition that felt like benediction after lifetimes spent watching lesser competents receive praise for achievements they hadn't contributed to beyond political positioning.
Perhaps fresh perspective might succeed where divine patience has encountered limitations that experience alone cannot overcome.
The offer felt like acknowledgement that my contributions held value beyond mere accident of skill or temporary usefulness in cosmic games. For the first time since my capture, conversation carried implications of ongoing partnership rather than temporary exploitation of resources that would be discarded when political necessity demanded different approaches. But the weight of Grimjaw's warnings pressed against my consciousness, like gathering storm clouds, promising complications that could destroy whatever fragile connection had developed through shared botanical passion despite hierarchical structures designed to prevent emotional attachments that undermined rational authority through sentiment. The morning light filtering through crystalline barriers grew brighter as alien constellations completed rotations that obeyed different astronomical principles, their radiance casting prismatic patterns across surfaces that reflected infinite depths. Whatever trust had been offered through breakfast conversation would be tested by forces beyond individual preference or collaborative satisfaction. Cosmic authorities whose judgment would determine whether botanical partnership could survive scrutiny from powers that treated gods like middle management and mortals like renewable resources in equations balanced through systematic harvesting of consciousness itself.
Chapter 15. Rising to the Challenge.
The journal entry read like a treasure map, written in botanical terminology that bridged worlds through carefully documented exploration. Moon Whisper Root, found only on Sylvanos Prime during the dark phase of its twin moons, capable of accelerating plant growth by decades in mere hours through dimensional resonance that defied earthly understanding. The accompanying sketch showed delicate silver tendrils that seemed to glow with their own ethereal light, growing near thermal vents in crystalline forests where reality bent to accommodate impossible beauty. My fingers traced the faded ink while memories of yesterday's success burned bright in enhanced consciousness. If I could cultivate healing trees in greenhouse soil, imagine what miracles awaited with proper specimens from their native realms. The World Tree Gateway pulsed with patient invitation just beyond the greenhouse's crystalline walls, its translucent surface revealing glimpses of infinite possibilities that stretched through cosmic space like corridors carved from starlight itself. I'd stolen from gods and lived to witness consequences that spanned multiple dimensions, survived dimensional predators through divine intervention, and earned grudging acknowledgement from creatures whose loyalty had been forged across centuries of shared violence. The portal to Sylvanos Prime shimmered like captured moonlight given substance, showing forests of crystal and living stone beneath alien constellations that wheeled in configurations unknown to earthly astronomy. My pack of borrowed supplies felt insignificant against the magnitude of crossing between worlds, but Mother's voice echoed across the years. When faced with opportunity wrapped in mortal danger, choose boldness over safety. The sensation of dimensional travel stretched consciousness through spaces that existed between heartbeats, while simultaneously spanning geological ages. When coherent thought reassembled itself, Sylvanos Prime breathed around me with its own alien rhythm that spoke of worlds where time flowed according to different principles. The air tasted of ozone and distant starlight filtered through atmospheric composition that challenged lungs designed for terrestrial gas mixtures. Crystalline trees chimed in harmonious chorus when touched by winds that carried scents of minerals unknown to earthly geology, their surfaces reflecting light that fell from twin moons hanging like silver coins against star-scattered sky painted in shades that had no earthly names. The thermal vents were exactly where the journal promised, fissures in crystalline stone that leaked warmth and sulfurous breath into atmosphere that shimmered with barely contained energy. And there, growing in spaces between dimensions where reality grew thin, silver tendrils caught moonlight like captured dreams waiting to be harvested by hands brave enough to reach across impossible distances. The Moon Whisper root came free from its dimensional anchorage with resistance that suggested intelligence recognizing optimal harvesting conditions. Each tendril pulsed with contained power that made my enhanced fingertips tingle with recognition of forces that operated beyond normal botanical processes, energy that could compress centuries of growth into moments of breathtaking transformation. But the sound that rose from crystal meadows beyond the thermal vents spoke of predators whose hunting instincts had been triggered by disturbance in carefully maintained ecosystems. Hoofbeats thundered across surfaces that rang like struck bells, their rhythm carrying harmonics of violence that belonged to creatures whose evolution had been shaped by territorial dominance through superior speed and calculated cruelty. Centaurs emerged from shadow-dappled groves like nightmares given flesh and terrible purpose. Half-human torsos rising from powerful equine bodies that combined intelligence with physical capabilities that transcended both species' natural limitations separately. Their faces bore expressions of cruel anticipation that spoke of predators who'd cornered wounded prey in territory that offered no sanctuary from justice, administered through methods refined across lifetimes.
What have we here?
Their leader's voice carried undertones of violence barely contained by social structures that demanded certain ritualistic formalities before educational experiences could commence.
A little thief wandering far from her herd.
Rough hands seized my arms with strength that could pulverize bone, their grip leaving bruises that would darken by morning, if I lived to see it. More hands grabbed my legs as I thrashed against their hold, the moon whisper root specimens scattering from my pack across crystal ground that rang like funeral bells beneath their hooves.
Hold still, little rabbit.
The leader snarled, his human torso scarred from what looked like decades of violent encounters.
Makes the binding easier.
They forced my wrists together with rope that scraped like sandpaper against enhanced skin, the fibers burning as they tightened beyond circulation. My ankles received the same treatment, thick coils that left no room for movement or hope of escape. When they lifted a wooden pole between two of their number, my blood turned to ice. No, wait, please. But they were already threading the pole between my bound limbs, hoisting me like captured game. My shoulders screamed as my full weight settled against joints not designed for such stress. The world tilted sickeningly as they lifted me between them, my head hanging at an angle that made the crystal forest spin in nauseating circles. I could see their large dangling manhoods, swaying with each step, a grotesque reminder of the fate that awaited me.
Look at her dangle.
One of them chuckled, his voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone discussing livestock.
Been a while since we had one this soft to play with.
The chief will want first taste.
Another added, trotting alongside my swaying form.
But there's plenty to go around after. These human females break so creatively when you know which pressure points to find.
My stomach lurched. Whether from their words or the nauseating motion, I couldn't tell. Every step they took sent jolts of pain through my suspended body, the rope cutting deeper into flesh with each jarring impact. Crystalline branches whipped past my face, leaving thin cuts that stung in the alien air.
Wonder how long this one will last.
The leader mused, his tone conversational as if discussing weather patterns.
The last visitor lasted 3 days before her mind snapped. Made the most interesting sounds toward the end.
This one's got spirit, though. Look how she's still fighting the bonds.
I was fighting them, uselessly. The rope had been designed by beings who understood restraint as both art and science. Every struggle only tightened the coils, cutting off more circulation until my fingers began to tingle with approaching numbness. The forest grew denser as we traveled deeper into centaur territory, crystalline formations giving way to structures that spoke of intelligence applied to territorial control. Carved markers bore warnings in scripts that hurt to observe directly, their meaning seeping into consciousness through channels that bypassed language entirely.
Almost home, little morsel.
The leader called back to me, his scarred face twisted with anticipation.
The boys have been getting restless without proper entertainment. You'll help with that, won't you?
The camp materialized from shadow like something conjured from nightmares. Hide tents stretched in organized rows, their surfaces decorated with what my mind initially dismissed as abstract art before horrified recognition set in. Trophies. remnants of previous visitors who'd wandered too far from dimensional gateways. The chieftain's tent dominated the settlement's center like a monument to systematic cruelty. Twice the size of the others, its walls bore decorations that made my enhanced vision blur with protective instinct. I deliberately focused on the ground, counting crystal fragments to avoid cataloging the evidence of what awaited in that canvas cathedral of violence. They lowered me roughly beside the tent's entrance, the pole clattering against stone as my bound form hit earth that had been packed hard by countless ceremonies. The leader crouched beside my head, his breath carrying scents of fermented fruit and something metallic that might have been old blood.
"Rest up, little rabbit,"
he whispered, close enough that his words stirred hair matted with sweat and terror.
"Chief's got quite the celebration planned. Wouldn't want you too tired to appreciate his creativity."
"Please," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the growing cacophony of the centaur's celebration. "Don't do this." But they ignored my pleas, their laughter cruel and mocking as they began to bind me to a sturdy wooden table. They forced my torso down over the table's surface, my wrists tied to the legs with rope that cut into my flesh. My ankles were secured to the other set of legs, stretching my body taut and leaving me helpless and exposed.
"Comfortable?"
The leader sneered, running a hand through my hair and gripping it tightly.
"You're going to love this human. Chief knows how to treat his toys. Keep her fresh."
The leader called over his shoulder as they prepared to leave.
"Chief likes them responsive."
The tent flap dropped, plunging me into suffocating darkness. Outside, voices rose in celebration, wild whoops and stamping hooves that made the ground vibrate beneath my feet. Someone struck up a drum, its rhythm matching my thundering heartbeat as dread pooled in my stomach like cold lead. The centaur's chants and jeers filtered through the tent walls, their words graphic and obscene, promising a night of unimaginable horror. What did responsive mean? What had happened to the last visitor they'd mentioned, the one who'd lasted 3 days? My imagination conjured horrors that made my nervous system flood with panic chemicals. I forced myself to focus on the ropes instead of spiraling into terror. The bindings were tight, professional work that spoke of long practice. But as I tested them with small, careful movements, I noticed something. They were tied for restraint, not display. The knots showed confidence, maybe overconfidence. These weren't the bonds of captors who expected escape attempts. They were the casual restraints of predators so assured of their dominance that the possibility of resistance hadn't even crossed their minds. Outside, centaur voices rose in drunken revelry that masked approaching footsteps until massive frame materialized in tent entrance, like salvation, wearing amber eyes that reflected starlight in patterns too complex for mere animal intelligence.
Foolish little mouse.
Grimjaw growled, but claws that could rend steel made quick work of restraining ropes with surgical precision.
Did you think dimensional travel was some recreational activity for mortal amusement?
Her amber gaze held mixture of exasperation and grudging acknowledgement that survival instincts had proven adequate for navigating dangers that claimed beings with significantly more experience in cosmic politics.
At least you had sense enough to leave trail even Pack could follow.
She continued, checking rope burns with efficiency that spoke of medical training acquired through necessity during lifetimes spent in activities where injury was occupational hazard. Freedom flooded my limbs as circulation returned, but our escape window was closing with each passing moment of centaur celebration that would eventually conclude with return to discover missing prisoner. The forest provided cover as we fled through crystalline undergrowth that rang like wind chimes with each footstep. Grimjaw's enhanced senses guided us through pathways invisible to human perception, her massive frame moving with surprising grace through terrain that would challenge armies equipped with supernatural capabilities. Behind us, angry shouts marked discovery of my escape, followed by thunder of hooves across crystal meadows that offered no concealment from pursuit conducted by beings whose hunting capabilities had been refined through generations of territorial enforcement. The ambush materialized at Crystal Clearing, where thermal vents leaked sulfurous breath into atmosphere that shimmered with dimensional energy. 3 centaurs blocked our path with drawn weapons that gleamed with promises of violence beneath alien stars, their leader's scarred face twisted with rage at losing prize that would have provided entertainment for celebrations spanning multiple seasonal cycles. The pouch of crystalline powder from Kaelan's greenhouse felt warm against my palm. Journal notes describing paralytic properties flooding back through terror-sharpened memory. The cloud of silver dust caught them by surprise, paralysis taking effect with speed that suggested alchemical processes operating beyond normal chemical reactions. I watched with grim satisfaction as mighty forms crumpled to crystalline earth, their weapons falling from nerveless fingers as consciousness remained intact, while motor functions ceased according to specifications detailed in ancient texts. 10 minutes. That's how long paralysis would hold, according to documentation written by beings whose lifespans provided adequate time for careful observation of biological processes. We ran through crystal forests toward the distant glow of the World Tree portal, my lungs burning with each ragged breath. The alien air felt thin, wrong somehow, as if my enhanced biology couldn't quite process the atmospheric cocktail of this world. My legs screamed with exhaustion, muscles that had been pushed beyond their limits now operating on pure desperation. Grimjaw's breathing came in harsh pants beside me, even her supernatural constitution strained by the relentless pace. Sweat matted her fur despite the cool night air, and I could smell the metallic tang of overexertion radiating from her massive frame. The portal grew larger, brighter. So close I could make out individual facets of its crystalline structure, see the familiar shadows of home flickering beyond its translucent surface. My heart hammered with something approaching hope as the dimensional barrier filled our vision. Sanctuary, just 20 yards away. 15 yards. 10. Almost there. I gasped, finding strength I didn't know remained in muscles that felt like molten lead. 5 yards from salvation, from safety, from... They erupted from concealment like death given form and terrible purpose. Centaurs materialized from crystal formations that had seemed empty moments before. Their coordination speaking of ambush tactics perfected through countless successful hunts. A dozen of them formed a crescent between us and the portal, weapons gleaming with reflected starlight. The hope that had carried me those final desperate steps crumbled like ash in my mouth. So close. We'd been so impossibly, heartbreakingly close.
Run, little thieves.
Their leader called, his scarred face twisted with cruel satisfaction at springing the perfect trap.
Let us see how fast those mortal legs can carry you when the real hunt begins.
The portal pulsed with patient invitation just beyond their reach, dimensional barrier that separated us from sanctuary by distance that might as well have been measured in light years given the tactical situation that placed overwhelming force between desperate fugitives and only available escape route. My fingers closed around the Moonwhisper root in my pack, the specimen pulsing with power capable of miracles through dimensional resonance. But 12 centaurs with drawn weapons stood between us and freedom, their amber eyes reflecting starlight as they closed the circle with predatory precision. We were trapped, the portal tantalizingly close, yet impossibly distant. The Moonwhisper root pulsed against my palm like a captured heartbeat, promising miracles if I could find a way to bridge the gap between desperation and salvation. But first, we had to survive the hunt that was about to begin.